And I am joined by Kristen Holmes, who is a good friend. In fact, she was involved with the 777 expedition in supporting performance alongside Dr. Kirk Parsley, who who we could go on and have conversations about for 3 hours, but we won't do that. No, Kristen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good.
Really good to see you, Mike.
You too, man. You too. In the intro, impressive resume. Not only a great athlete, but you won 12 titles in the 13 seasons that you coached, and it was Princeton field hockey, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. First off, you must have inherited a team. Did the first year that you took over, did you guys win the title?
We did. Yep.
What is it about coaching leadership that
Mm.
you attribute to your success?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a pretty robust infrastructure that was a performance education infrastructure that was a core differentiator. It wasn't just, it served as our recruiting platform. So I think in the recruiting process, I think you can, over glamorize what the experience is about. And I took kind of the opposite strategy. I was like, look, this is going to be really hard. It's going to be the hardest 4 years of your life. Like, there's nothing harder than, being, well, there's a lot of things that are harder, but, and maybe this sounds kind of funny, but it's hard to achieve academically at a place like Princeton University while simultaneously achieving athletically. It's very, very hard to balance the demands of being a student athlete at a place like Princeton, because it's not resourced like it is like a Stanford or a Michigan, and those are the teams that we were competing against. So we had to have something to attract. I wanted to win a national championship. I didn't just want to win one Ivy League title, and I wanted to win every year. So, what did we need to do in order to attract high performance athletes? And that's really, I think, the infrastructure that I built there. And the core differentiator was, it was an infrastructure that you're not only going to get everything that you need to get to, play in Olympic Games, for example. You're going to get the technical and tactical coaching, but you're also going to get this other education. You're going to learn about your body. You're going to understand the factors, both psychological and physiological, that move around your capacity to not only achieve everything that you want to achieve on the athletic field, but also in the classroom and then in your life, after your 4 years. And we really sold that platform.
Okay, so let me step back. So you were a member of the U.S. national field hockey team. So naturally, you have the respect of your players. You lived it. You've got credibility when you're talking. Were you already in the field of human performance prior to becoming a coach? You'd already started your master's and
So I was working when I was at University of Iowa, which is where I did my undergrad. I coached right out of college and was coaching in parallel to playing on the U.S. national team. So it was really there's a lot going on, but it was amazing, and that's when I started my master's. And I linked up with two PhD students who were really interested in marrying the psychology and the physiology, but they weren't athletes. So they kind of needed me to kind of help stitch it together. And we started building a performance education platform that was really kind of taking everything that we knew from physiology, everything that we knew from psychology, and really putting this together so we could understand and almost like take the, mystery out of performance, right? We had this kind of mantra: performance is a choice. If you understand the factors that move around your performance, like your attentional capacity, your energy production, your motivation, if you understand the factors that move around, you can show up every day and perform. And that's really kind of the core message that I took to Princeton. I was like, performance is a choice. I'm going to tell you exactly what upgrades, and I'm going to tell you exactly what downgrades. And every single day you have a choice, and you can pick which behaviors because that behavior is going to upgrade, this behavior is going to downgrade. And it's not rocket science, but it's like putting that out there really explicitly, and then obviously having some things to quantify, physiological markers to help quantify, and so kind of some subjective markers to help quantify. But you put all this together, and all of a sudden it becomes very obvious, like what's helpful and what isn't. And then you just make choices.
Now, was a program like this that you set up in Princeton in place in Iowa or at the national team?
No. So I kind of, started kind of to stitch it together at Iowa, and then I left. I actually started my own business and was recruited to coach at Princeton. So there's kind of a 2-year gap where I really continued to develop this model, and was testing it. I kind of started a national camp coaching clinic business. So I was in 17 different locations across the U.S. I ran this business for like 17 years, and it was amazing. So I got to kind of test these principles around coaching and kind of develop a framework and a curriculum. And then I kind of brought that to Princeton and just iterated on it over the course of my 13 seasons, and pulling in all sorts of intel from the incredible Princeton ecosystem, like folks like Daniel Kahneman. And
Yeah.
I probably have 3 degrees just from like auditing courses, but from neuroscience and psychology. So I kind of continued to kind of build I guess just a model that was pretty rock solid, and I think stands up to all the science that's evolved over the to today.
As you say, the physiological and the psychological components,
Hmm.
and marrying those two together, there's such beauty in those two things, man. If you can master
Hmm.
those two things, yeah, human
You have the
performance
keys
is
to the
going to go through the
kingdom.
charts.
Yeah.
I I do want to get to this though. You know, one, you work with a lot of high performing teams
Hmm.
within athletics, but then you've worked with a lot of special operations and
Hmm.
extreme athletes.
Hmm.
How often have you worked with like the private sector? People just at Johnson and Johnson
Hmm.
working the 8 to 7. I mean, have
Yeah.
you studied human performance in that realm and how you again pair the psychological and the physiological sides to get more performance out of your everyday warriors?
Absolutely. Yeah, we did a really beautiful study with McKinsey, actually, in collaboration with McKinsey, where we looked at CEOs, and we studied all sorts of different types of variables. We actually took measures from their direct reports as well to kind of stitch together a story. But it was called the Executive Leadership Program, and we're actually in the analysis phase. But one of the things that we tested was psychological safety. And so, as you know full well, psychological safety is this was coined by Dr. Amy Edmondson, who was actually one of our investigators in on this study. But what we looked at is, we wanted to understand, and this is the first study of its kind, actually looking at the physiology and the psychology kind of simultaneously in leaders, and how that affects leadership. And what bubbled to the surface, and this is wild, is this metric called sleep debt. So, how much sleep debt, which is basically what Whoop says you need. So, Whoop is a physiological 24/7 physiological monitoring device. We measure sleep. It's basically what Whoop says you need versus what you got. The delta between what you need and what you got is called sleep debt. So basically, we found a very strong statistical relationship between the sleep debt of a leader and the psychological safety of their teams. So how safe you feel, how safe you feel like you can come to the table and express your ideas and be your most authentic self is contingent on how much sleep debt your leader is carrying.
And I'm going to assume that the higher the sleep debt, the more the
Of course. Yes.
psychological, emotional instability.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is
That
just one example, yeah, of just this marrying of kind of the psychology and the physiology.
man, you look at like investment banking and the hours that they work.
I know.
That's insane.
I know, I know, and it's one of those things where you can't actually perceive your own physical, mental, and emotional declines, and I think that's what's really sneaky, and I think that's the opportunity really, that you can make choices every day that are not serving you, and you might not feel it acutely in the moment, but people around you, I mean, this is an example with sleep debt, right? Like, it's not just impacting you, it's impacting every single person around you. And not to mention, what about your family when you come home after your workday? Your employees don't feel psychologically safe. I mean, we know from the data that when you come home, a less you're not a great version of yourself always, right? Like, you're in terms of your compassion and your tolerance level and your irritability. I mean, the family gets the worst of you sometimes. So yeah, sleep debt is real, and it doesn't just affect you. So that was a clear outcome, and I think anyone who is a human can take can take, I think, that insight and apply it to their life directly.
We just had Kelly Starrett on
Oh,
the sub. Okay, so
the
you know
supple
Kelly,
leopard. Oh my
the
gosh,
supple
yeah.
leopard, and I
I've
love
been
him.
working on my mobility. It's not a strength. I'm just a meathead, like I just, I've always pushed around heavy weight, and I mean I'm fast and agile, I suppose, but yeah, mobility has never been like a huge strength. So, but I've been like rocks, like laser focused on it. So
It,
yeah.
he actually brought up the fact that like this generation is more mobile than we were. However, he threw out some statistics where this generation also has like more ACL and MCL tears than our generation, which I found interesting. But he did talk about how the the continued emphasis on human performance is what just continues to
Mm.
drive these current athletes to be so much better than we were. As you look back at Iowa and the national team,
Mhm.
were there things that you just laugh about that like the coaching staff or the system was just doing completely wrong
I mean,
to maximize performance? And I'm not trying to call people out. It's just
no, no,
it
no.
was
They didn't
what was
know.
understood at the
They
time.
didn't
Yeah,
know. Yeah. I mean, there was not a day that my legs weren't just like blocks of cement. I mean, we overtrained like you would not believe. I mean, the stuff that we would do. I mean, we'd run, 2400s, and you had to run each one at a minute 30, and you'd have a minute 30 rest in between. Like we'd run 20, and then we'd do 12 200s. Like we just did an insane amount of volume. And then, oh, by the way, the next morning we'd play Korea. It just like was just insane. Like you just did not have time to recover. So there's no question the recovery component and just the ability to kind of measure volume and intensity, at individual levels and be able to kind of treat and coach athletes at an individual level, because we all can, are going to respond to stimulus in a different way, right? And almost need to be kind of, you can't apply like one like training program to like the team necessarily, right? Like we kind of all have different things genetically that, I might need to like work on my speed, for example. Someone else might need to work more on their endurance base. And some people are naturally strong versus other people who, really need to work in that area. So yeah, so I think when I look back, I'm like, oh my God, it was just like a blanket program. We were just
yeah,
trained
one
like
size
small
fits all.
men. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So is there an increase in individualization
for sure.
within? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the opportunity, right? To kind of understand how each person is responding and adapting to stimuli. It's not just about training load, right? And that was the other big aha moment when I got to Princeton and I started. I had GPS, so I had mini maxes, I had first beat, I had super robust like heart rate technology. I mean, I built like super sophisticated models. I was substituting athletes off of epoch, which no one is even doing today, to be honest. But so we were so sophisticated in kind of all the physiological data that we're pulling in, and our models were so robust. But the thing that kept frustrating me and what led me to Whoop, honestly, was that it was not like no model that I could create could actually predict next day capacity, right? So it didn't matter how hard I trained them. It was the other 22 hours, 21 hours of the day that was more influential. And that was the time that I didn't have control over, right? So when you talk about individualizing high performance environments, if you don't have a handle on the other 20 hours that they're not with you, good luck. Good luck. Like actually like being able to repeat success, because that is what is going to drive when you get up to the top, right? When you get up to these really high performance elite environments, so you're talking like the San Francisco Giants and like, that kind of like all the athletes are great, right? Like they've got like this baseline genetic capacity, they've got great skills and expertise. It's all being nurtured by high end, information coming from like coaches and support staff. The difference is just the choices that these dudes are going to make around nutrition, around hydration, whether or not they drink alcohol, whether or not they stabilize sleep wake time, the amount of time they spend in bed. Like that is what is going to determine whether or not you win championships and whether you can win not just 1 year but repeated years. It's what the guys are doing in the other 20 hours.
It's the other 20 hours though, especially for these college students coming in where there's programs that are just very, very disciplined and regimented. I could see how that sort of robs from the college experience because you're
It
so
depends
fixated.
it just depends on what you want your college experience to be.
Yeah. Oh
Like if
no,
you want to,
totally.
if, and that's where I think, I have a hard take on this, but like, I mean, I think how drinking is normalized across college campuses is just, you know, mind numbing to me. Like I just don't even understand it. Like how we've made it okay for kids to just go into college environments and just binge drink their faces off. I mean, what are we trying to do here? Like I have a hard time like understanding that. But
Well, my college experience was different because one, I was hell, I think I was like 23
mm,
when I started because the Marine Corps sent me back. So
right.
I was 23 is not old, but I also was a Marine, and
Yeah.
I would be sent back to the fleet if I screwed up. But
Right.
if you could go back to your younger self, I would even. But you've partied with SEALs, you've partied with special forces guys. There's a lot of drinking.
Yeah.
Even if I could go back to my 30-year-old self and just be like, bro, just cut out the drinking, you will feel so much
Oh,
better when you're 40,
oh,
45, 50. Like, and I regret that. I regret that. But I remember I did do 2 years no drinking in the SEAL teams, and that was the best shape I've ever been in.
yeah.
Best shape. It's poison. It is poison any way you cut it.
I know. There's no moderate level. Like there's no amount of alcohol that's kind of safe for you. Unfortunately, I know that's tough for people to hear, but this is just a scientific fact at this point. Like we're not, it's not really up for debate anymore. Um, yeah.
Well, has Whoop done? Well, I'm sure somebody has.
Oh,
Has Whoop done studies where they had like a test group where like, hey, you're just going to go to sleep, and then another that like drinks before or has a
oh
certain
yeah.
amount of alcohol?
Oh yeah. We have so much. Yeah. I mean the amount of data we have on alcohol. I mean it's just it crushes your recovery. So your heart rate variability will take anywhere from a 10 to 20 millisecond like decrease, right? Higher heart variability, better. So that's like clinically off the charts in terms of significance. And then your resting heart rate will go, anywhere from like, 5 to 20, depending on how much you drink. Increase in beats per minute. So what's happening kind of physiologically, obviously there's just enormous perturbations, like your system is trying to process and digest all of this alcohol. As a result, you don't get into deeper stages of sleep. And so you're just basically, you can throw out anytime you're drinking probably more than 2 drinks within 2 hours of bedtime, you can basically throw out that sleep. So all the genes that should be turning on, they don't turn on. All the restorative things that need to be happening in terms of just the housekeeping, like cleanup that should be happening in the brain is not happening, right? So, and every missed sleep is basically you're just knocking, kind of hours and days and weeks off your life.
So is sleep the number one predictor of performance? Or is it?
So
I know that's sort of a very generalized
no,
statement.
yeah, I mean, I feel very confident in saying that it's actually you have to spend sufficient time in bed. There's no question. So when you think about the three kind of core pillars of sleep, it's sufficiency, so spending enough time in bed. It is quality, but what drives quality, and sleep quality has almost a linear relationship with heart rate variability, where sleep duration doesn't as much. So time, how much time you're spending in bed, but there is a course of there's going to be a point in which you're not spending enough time in bed, and you know, but um, but but by and large, if you look at literature, heart rate variability correlates, which is a marker of kind of overall health and well-being, and just your ability to kind of adapt in a functional way to stress is correlated to quality of sleep. And the thing that drives the behavior that drives quality sleep is your sleep wake time. So how stable when you go to bed and when you wake up will drive your sleep quality. Okay, so we see this. We just finished a huge study with the U.S. Army, looking at paratroopers in Alaska, and of course, there's just awesome like seasonal kind of natural variation, and just light dark, right? And we know that light, apart from our our sleepiness, when we think about circadian rhythms, right, are really what's happening here and what we're seeing, and kind of going back to your initial question, is sleep the most important thing in recovery and in performance? It's really synchronized circadian rhythms that drive performance levels. Okay, and the path to synchronizing your circadian rhythms is stabilizing your sleep wake time. When you stabilize your sleep wake time, you inherently are probably viewing light relatively, for the most part, inside kind of that natural light dark cycle. So what's actually happening naturally in terms of the sun going down and the sun coming up, right? The other benefit of a stable sleep-wake time is you probably are ending your meals generally a couple to few hours before you intend to sleep, generally. Okay, so this one behavior of kind of stabilizing sleep-wake time, I think has a cascade effect across these other behaviors that drive our circadian rhythms. So I think to answer this question, if people really want to get a handle on their performance and they want to kind of crush life, they need to synchronize their circadian rhythms.
Which for
Which means,
parents,
well, yeah, and there's other levers. So if you
yeah.
can't go to bed and wake up because you have young children, um, then you want to just make sure that your feeding window is when the sun is up to
Mhm.
the degree that you can. If you're a shift worker, you want to try to eat all of your calories during the natural, whenever it's, going to be the kind of biological day. And when you're working at night, you want to try to, not eat very much, just to kind of keep that regularity and try to, you know, do as much as you can that in a way that, you know, basically endogenously, like our clocks are kind of expecting certain things to happen. And when we create a lot of variation between what actually is happening and what we want to do endogenously, that creates this misalignment or that desynchronization.
Mm.
And that is what leads to metabolic dysfunction. That leads to suppressed melatonin. That's what leads to mental health issues, reduced physical capacity. So infertility. So all of these problems that emerge, you can kind of link back to these circadian rhythms and how aligned or misaligned they are.
None of this was ever discussed early in my career in special operations.
I know
Not at
people
all.
miss the circadian rhythm conversation. We talk about, oh, spend more time in bed. Well, that's good advice, but
Mm.
it's very incomplete because if you're not viewing light when you wake up, that's a real problem. And if you're not getting daylight during the day, that's a problem, right? Like that is what really strengthens the our circadian rhythms, right? If we're eating over the course, and let me like 74% of Americans are eating over the course of 15 to 16 hours a day, which is so much stress on our body. Digestion is so effortful, right? So when we're eating in these massive, we're kind of creating these really huge eating windows, that is invariably going to disrupt our sleep. That's going to invariably disrupt when we can actually fall asleep, right? So we want to try to consolidate our feeding windows. We want to see lots of light in the morning, lots of light during the day, when it's, natural sunlight ideally, or, daylight. We want to consolidate our feeding windows to, eat when the sun is up. And then we want to try to stabilize when we go to bed and when we wake up. And then we want to make sure we're restricting light in the lead up to bed, and definitely between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m.
As you're talking through this, I'm pretty much visualizing how many rules I break.
I
Um,
know, but most people are, and that's why we have a crisis of metabolic disease. That's why we have a crisis of cardiovascular disease. That's why the world population has never been unhealthier, right? Is because we're just asking our body to do stuff that it's just not built to do. We have not evolved or adapted to blue light after the sun goes down. Like we just haven't, right? So as a result, we see real effects on our dopamine system and the mood and the circuitry in our brain. Our mood is compromised when we're viewing light between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. Right? We see this. We know this. It has a pro-depressive effect, right? So you're depressed. Well, you can kind of link back to all these things that I'm talking about.
let me ask you this, because you said you just finished a study with the U.S. Army and the paratroopers. So, one of the funny phrases in the military was sleep deprivation training. Hey, this is going to be really rough. Sleep deprivation training, food deprivation training. Can someone train to sleep deprivation? Does the body adjust? Or no matter what you're doing, it's going to impact performance?
No, you adapt to a lower level of performance is what happens. It's like, okay, let me ask you this. Does getting heat stroke make you more equipped to handle heat?
No, it actually, I think, increases the chances of recurrent heat stroke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the same principle applies to sleep deprivation, right? Like you don't you to get back to baseline after a bout of sleep deprivation, it's going to take you probably 2 weeks, right? So you want to minimize that as much as possible. You want operators to be as robust and resilient as often as humanly possible. That means you want to balance the load, the volume, and the intensity relative to capacity and make sure that there's a really beautiful cadence there. So you're overtraining in a functional way as often as possible. You want to make these guys as strong and as resilient as possible. And the path to that is not sleep depriving them, depriving them of sleep. You want to increase lethality. You get them to go to bed and wake up at the same time as much as humanly possible. Like that will increase the strength of our force, like unbelievably. But this shit isn't being taught, just to be very clear. Like we're doing the opposite of all this, frankly, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, the systems take a while to evolve
I know.
and adapt. And
I know.
Kelly was talking about that.
Yeah.
Where, I know the fitness community is up in arms about Ozempic, and Kelly's like, hey, we had 15 years to convince the populace to follow these practices to reduce weight, and they didn't do it. So of course they're going to do Ozempic.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at data regarding sleep based off geography? Like, hey, in Italy, they get better quality sleep due to societal differences than, let's say, North America and the United States?
We have those data. I'd have to look. I can't remember off the top of my head who the best sleepers are, but we have World Sleep Day coming up, and we will analyze the data and look at that.
That's pretty cool. I'd be interested just based off lifestyle, because again, you go to Greece and life is just slower. And
totally is.
They actually, well, I mean, they go later into the night, but they wake up later traditionally compared to Americans. And I'm assuming within the sports arena, from collegiate to professional, they're putting a greater emphasis on sleep and getting the coaches and recovery and getting the coaches to back off.
I think everyone recognizes that it's the greatest legal performance enhancing drug, sleep, that is. So yeah, I think everyone is really on board. But I think, again, like, I go into environments and again, it's like telling kids to spend more time in bed without thinking about these kind of circadian behaviors that are going to drive, like, and it's, for the most part, it's good. We have made some traction, I know the Yankees a few years ago, I was inside their environment and they were having guys come at 6 a.m. trying to build resilience. I was like, listen, like, these kids are like, they're 22, 23 years old. Like, they're biologically, they're not primed to be ready to go at 6 a.m. Like, they're still, their bodies are still cold. Like, you're not going to get the most of them. So they kind of shifted things, and it actually had a huge impact on performance levels, and obviously just the kind of the overall health and wellness of their group. And it didn't mean that they could, that it wasn't. And I could talk a little bit about like this notion of that we have like evening larks or the night owls and the larks, and would love to talk for a second about that, because I think what we think as a society in terms of when bedtimes are for younger populations, like these 23-year-old Yankees players versus someone else, it's not actually it's not what people think it is. But yeah, so once we kind of put some, I think, reasonable parameters and used kind of the science, not surprisingly, the kids get a lot happier and played a lot better.
You do the same thing I do. You calling them kids.
Yeah. Well, at this point,
young
I'm
men.
just young. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Young men and women.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Whoop, did you find Whoop or did Whoop find you?
Yeah. So I was building some technology at Princeton. So I kind of had this idea. One of the problems that I was trying to solve in my environment was the fact that I didn't know the capacity levels of my athletes. So I was always frustrated that I couldn't design, the right practice program. I couldn't design the right, the right practice. My designs were always like a bit off because I didn't know the recovery of my athletes. Like, one athlete stayed up really late, was doing XYZ for a couple nights in a row. She was dragging ass, and I would end up getting injured. I just didn't have like enough information to be able to like properly design practices. So I started and I had all this technology, but yet still couldn't solve that question. So I started building some technology. I was basically just had like the top Fitbit product, was using that, and I actually raised like $250,000 and hired some, statistical machine learning, some computational biologists. And we took the Fitbit API and we're like pulling all this data in and started building algorithms to be able to really quantify readiness based on this 24/7 picture. And we got through beta, got really far down the track. Of course, I hadn't started building hardware yet. I was just wanted to get the algorithms right off this heart rate data. We had some really interesting features around mental health. Of course, a lot of my background is in psychology, so I was like
Mhm.
pulling that in, which is really cool, subjective data, and it was actually part of like most loved feature. But we had sleep and we had readiness. This was before Aura. I had a readiness score, and it was actually like really starting to give us some really valuable intel, and helped us kind of really get be able to, I think prepare our athletes better. We were reducing injuries, like it's pretty sweet. And so anyway, throughout the process, I was basically giving a presentation to our varsity club, and one of the guys on the call was an investor in Whoop, and he was like, "Oh, have you heard of Whoop? This sounds just like Whoop." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I like, dropped in a puddle of tears. I'm like, "Someone else is building this? What?" I thought I had like, he's like, "Yeah, and they have like hardware too." I'm like, "Oh no." So anyway, within 48 hours, I was in New York sitting down with Will Ahmed, who is our CEO.
Yes.
And we were just kind of exchanging war stories. And yeah, and he invited me up to Boston, and yeah, and offered me a job. And that was like 7 years ago.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're now at a position where you can collect near 24 hours of data. Of course, yeah, you got to recharge.
Truly. Well,
Um,
Whoop, you don't have to take it off your wrist to charge. You just put the battery on
that's
top.
right. That's
So
right.
we do
That
not
was
miss
ingenious.
a second of data. Yeah.
Yeah, that is right. I completely forgot that.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as too much data? And let me sort of
Yeah.
qualify that even further. Do you guys have the ability to then take all the data that you're getting and put it into algorithms that can allow people to make better educated decisions with regards to performance, sleep, and recovery?
I mean, that's the goal, right? And
Yeah.
I think what's important is like we train we don't buy data. We collect every single piece. Like we do our very own data collections and train our data off of our own data collections. So we're not just buying population data and applying that to our models, which every other wearable is doing. As a result, we are the most accurate by far. It's not even close on the market in terms of our heart rate and heart rate variability. All of the data that basically drives our algorithms and our features.
Will Whoop continue to look in terms of form factor the way it does, or in your
Yeah,
opinion, do you think it'll evolve to a different form?
yeah. I mean, I think we're really committed to the idea that we don't really want to be a watch.
Yeah, yeah,
I think there's a lot we can do with haptic. Just like when you're getting, hey, I want to train zone 2 today. Imagine like, that'd be super helpful, right? To kind of keep you in this heart rate threshold without having to look at a phone, without having to, but just. So I think there's a lot we can do without a watch face. But I love the idea of not getting pinged and notified. And I make a choice when I go in to look at those data. So I don't know, who knows? But I think as of right now, we're really committed to just passively collecting this data and allowing our member to go in and look at the data when they see fit.
At what point do you guys get further into the education game of human performance in terms of providing additional or more educational content than you guys produce now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really trying to figure out how to elegantly bake
Yeah,
that into the experience, right? So it's almost like, I mean, I do appear in videos in the app,
yeah.
I kind of, but I think like where we really need to get to is I think at this point, and you kind of alluded to it, there's a lot of science, right? Like I think we have a pretty clear understanding of how do we actually need to apply our effort if human optimization is a goal, right? If we're
Mhm.
really interested in kind of managing and controlling the trajectory of our health, how do we need to apply our effort across these three pillars? Like we can be way more explicit about that. So I think for me, like that's really what I'm trying to push at Whoop
Yes.
is that we need to bake in this point of view and create mechanisms within the experience that enable us to do those things, whether it's a zone 5 training, and we can track all this, but we don't necessarily have like a point of view. And I think that to me is like this next step is like, let's really like double down on sleep consistency. We see it bubbles up in every single study as being predictive of physiological and psychological resilience. Like, let's like surface that and make it really a super elegant experience. So people are very clear of like, hey, this is the minutes of variability that's tolerable for you physiologically. Like this is what you can get away with, this is what you can't. And then people can make very clear choices,
Mhm.
right? And then I think the next step is, okay, then let's show you a model of yourself 15 years from now if you continue down this path. I love that idea too.
Well, it's almost like your investment mechanism of the
Yeah,
compounding interest of, hey, if you make these changes, not only will your skin look younger, yeah,
yeah,
age won't age.
yeah. I mean,
I like that.
yeah, it's kind of this digital twin kind of concept that, yeah.
So you've been looking at this data for 20 plus years now. I mean,
Hmm.
you started when you were 15.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Totally.
yeah, and when I'm sure you get it from people where they're like, "Hey, what are those 3, 5, 7 things
Mm,
that you recommend I focus on?"
yeah.
Uh, for the listeners, like, hey, you already said it. Like, make sure you're getting that circadian rhythm, eating during those
Mhm.
the period of light. What are those things that you try to like just hone in on very quickly when people ask?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I'll say sleep wake time again. Like I
Take quick
can't
time.
emphasize that enough. Yeah. And then I think consolidating eating windows, even if you're eating like crap, if you're only eating like crap over the course of 8 hours during the daylight hours, that will get you like 60% of the way to your weight loss goals. and 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 it will also improve your metabolic functioning. Like so I think that time restricted eating does not get enough attention. And I think that is these things around time, right? They're democratically available for the most part. And it comes to, I love stuff, like I love behaviors that are about choice. Like I might not be able to control the quality and content of what I'm eating, but I can, for the most part, control the time of like when I put shit in my mouth. Right. And that, like, from a health intervention at scale, like will go so far. So, and then I think, and then alcohol, like I just see it just is crushing. It's crushing to sleep, to our heart variability, to your resting heart rate. We've got this new feature called Stress Monitor. I mean, holy shit. I had a Prosecco and it took my body 4 hours to get back. I had one Prosecco. It took my body 4 hours to get back to baseline. It's on a scale of 0 to 3. And I was like, it was like I was in a high stress environment, like high stress, like moment. It was like, I was like at like a 2.9, like 2.8, like the whole time. And usually like my baseline, I'm like zero point 0.4, like,
Yeah.
like totally chill. So it's just crazy what it does to your system. So yeah, and it sounds silly, but hydration, water, it's really important. We see that correlate really strongly with all the metrics that we track. Like people who are underhydrated and overfueled, are two of the really crushing behaviors. And then, obviously how you train is pretty important. I know for, folks who are just trying to get these other things right, that kind of slides down the priority list. But I mean, exercise, there's no question, can offset a lot of these other
Mhm.
behaviors that might not be perfect. So yeah, I mean, I think polarized training for someone who is not in a performance space but is looking purely for longevity is certainly the way to go. You want to maximize the interplay between kind of the cardiovascular nervous system, and you do that by these lower intensity training where I really see that as recovery. It's not even exercise zone 2, right? That's where you can talk comfortably,
Mhm.
and you can do it lots of different types of you can use lots of different modalities, but that's just like table stakes. Like that's just, 200 to 250 minutes a week of in that zone 2. And then zone 5, get out of breath a few times a week. Move heavy shit around, like go get in the backyard, throw some rocks around. Most people have access to some sort of heavy thing that they can move around. But yeah, so those would be kind of, I think, the high level
That's
stuff.
the 5. No, 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 that's your Prosecco comment. Now I'm like thinking back to when all the guys were sitting in Doha after Abu Dhabi and we're waiting to
I
fly to
know.
Australia and we're drinking like mimosas and we're
I
already
know.
sleep deprived.
I
Just
know.
it's like throwing, it's like pushing the Titanic even further
I know.
below the surface of the ocean or the bottom.
That's right.
Let me ask you this: in again Kelly Start, but we all know this. Like the 10,000 steps
Mm,
is like the hot thing
mm,
subject right now. But
yeah.
uh, primally, we were nomadic. We were always moving.
Mm,
Have you seen a difference in performance with
mhm,
regards to people that move more,
mhm.
or at least make it habitual to get up and go walk 2,000 steps here and there?
Yeah, I mean, exertion levels correlates to psychological functioning, and we saw this in our U.S. Army soldier. So exertion, calories is a good proxy for exertion, right? So the more calories you kind of burn, generally, like the happier you are. And you can think about it like that's like the choice that I make to go out and have coffee with my friend or to, just, I don't know, go for a walk or just to work out. Like when we are feeling well psychologically, we tend to move more. So there's a very strong relationship in that study between exertion levels, calories burned, and psychological well-being. And then we also did a study with 70,000 Whoop users. We had 6 months of mental health data. So we're looking at general anxiety. Um, we were looking at perceived stress and some other markers of psychological functioning. And, indeed, again, we saw two things: bubble, sleep consistency, and strain. So kind of our proxy for your cardiovascular load. So what's, I think, more valuable than steps, because you can be swimming or rowing and not get any steps, right? You don't get any credit, but you're working your heart, right? And that's why we measure strain. We don't measure steps because we want to understand the load that you're putting on your heart, right? How hard you're working your heart. And indeed, we see the harder you work your heart, actually, that seems to correlate really strongly with psychological functioning.
That is so encouraging to hear,
Yeah,
and
I think
and
so.
and to get people to fully understand that. Well, hell, to integrate this type of this type of instruction into
Mm.
lower school
Oh,
education.
I know. We've got, it's so cool. We've got our, the between the ages of 13 and 18, like that, like when you look at like how the type of users and just the stratification of our user base, that's just like growing. We don't even market to those to kids, but more kids are using it. And I love that moment where we'll be able to really, get in the hands of kids and kind of help them think about their body and really be empowered by understanding their body, and most importantly, that impact of behaviors on these metrics that are going to influence their mental, physical, and emotional well-being. I think that there's nothing more important for a human being is to understand the consequence of their choices, right? And how it impacts the trajectory of their health.
It, again, I'm blanking on his name, a psychologist, but he basically said that mental health is a metabolic issue.
Mm.
He actually, so they did a lot of data with the keto diet that when
Robert
people,
Lustig.
he just recently wrote a book. This is
Mm.
my brain, from my community. We are nothing but gray matter. But it was very interesting where he said the
Mm.
ketogenic diet, they found a massive reduction in anxiety and stress and
Hmm.
mental strain.
Hmm.
And then when the people came off it, literally in a matter of a day or two, those symptoms, stress,
Mm.
anxiety, came
Hmm.
back.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it goes to the diet, but
There's no question. I mean, what we're putting in our bodies has a massive impact on every aspect of our health. There's no question. Yeah.
This conversation could go for days, and we'll have you back on because I've got a lot of questions. Even with diet and the data you've seen
Mm,
with regards to specific diets,
mhm,
is a podcast in itself.
mhm.
So you are hosting Whoop's podcast, is that correct?
So Will Ahmed is officially the host, but yes, I do
Uh,
host a
Okay.
majority of them.
Where can people find you to
Okay.
listen to all the content that you're putting out and
Yeah.
educate themselves?
Yeah, so just whoop.com.
Mhm.
So the Whoop podcast is great. I typically interview scientists and experts, uh, uh, kind of expert researchers, and then will kind of generally interview athletes and CEOs. So that's kind of like how we
Yeah,
divide and conquer, I
yeah.
suppose. And then every now and again, we'll have like uh, someone host who's not Will or I, but yeah, whoop.com, and then yeah, I'll post stuff, human performance stuff on Instagram as well. Just Kristen Holmes, 2126, something like that. And then LinkedIn, I definitely try to like post some things. I'm not really good on either one of those platforms, honestly, but yeah, I try to throw some stuff of that's relevant for folks and hopefully is helpful.
Well, we will drop all the links to the platform as well. For the listeners, I would say this: invest in a Whoop. You will start to become addicted to checking your sleep in the morning when you wake up with all the
Yeah.
data. And Kristen, remind me, it usually takes. Is it almost instantaneous when you open the app to look at your sleep, or does it take a little bit when you wake up to?
Yeah, I mean, as long as your app is open in the background, there's very little latency. Like you can
Yeah.
pretty much just open it, it's right there. Yeah, it might take a few minutes or whatever, but yeah, if you keep your app open, which I don't ever shut it down, yeah, it's good.
What's interesting is, and I'm not saying you're going to throw the Whoop off, but you'd be like, oh man, I slept well. You look at the data and you're like, I woke up tired the previous morning, but the data shows that I had worse sleep.
Mm,
It's interesting, and then you start to think like, well, what was the difference between that and that? And it's amazing. And Whoop is a tool to aid with your human performance. So go check out Whoop, invest in it. Even if you've got other family members, even for the guys on 777, they were always opening the app and being like, yeah, I got good. My rest was this. My heart rate variability was this. It was,
mhm.
it becomes like a inner group challenge of who
Yeah,
slept the
and
best.
and what was great with 777 is I think a lot of the guys used it to they had a baseline before that, excruciatingly taxing mission, and then, when they got home, they were trying to kinda get themselves back to baseline, so, y you know, Nick Cush and I, like, chatted a ton, like, when he got home, he's like, "I'm struggling." Um, but yeah, it's great to just kind of see where you're at, and when you have moments in life where things aren't where you've got a really hard mission set or, you've got, the playoffs, like, I think it's important to understand, like, what that does to your body, and how do you not just adapt to a new lower level of performance, but get yourself back to neutral, right? Because if you keep doing that, then all of a sudden, like, you're dead at 50.
It's just like, hey, how can I lower the bar? What's the bare minimum I can do?
Yeah, I mean,
And thank you for calling 777 an excruciating mission. Because every time I bring it up, and I'm like, it was so tough. My wife just like stone faced. She's like, it was a boys' trip. I'm like, no, it wasn't a boys' trip. She's
I
like, it was
know.
a boys' trip.
It was a little bit of a boys' trip, but you guys did have to really, you had to really haul ass. There's no
Yeah,
question, and the
it was
data
fun.
support that.
We and at the end of the day, and I will say it, the quality of your support team is always one of the largest
Oh.
indicators in whether you're going to be successful or not. From you sending texts about guys in the performance to Missy
Mhm.
Tonis, who was working American Airlines
Yeah,
for last minute contingencies, to
star.
Kirk, it was awesome, and for that
Oh,
I do owe you. Let's just get to the documentary release in February.
yeah,
We don't know where
yeah.
yet. Maybe Hollywood. We'll see. But I think it'll be a good reunion for all of us. Kristen, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Again, we'll drop all those links, and we look forward to having you back on
Yeah,
to dig deeper.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much, Mike. It's
All
been
right,
fun.
guys. Thanks.
Bye.